One of my big mantras over the years for me has been make informed decisions by using data. The data that's in front of you should be the thing that you are using as a guide to help inform decision making. It doesn't make the decision for you, but it certainly is there to help guide and provide as much factual perspective as possible.
We just had Rick Dietz, who is the president of Advent, which is a chain of ENT locations opening up across the US. Super sharp CEO, or second in command to the founder. He's going to be talking around how he actually came into the organization, the private equity firm that brought him in as president to report into the founder and CEO, and how he's going to be growing the organization, talking about how he develops people, his focus on developing people. He's also at the process right now of getting rid of the almost entire management team and bringing in the right leadership team. They're about a 250 person company. So they're really building out that first leadership team. So a lot of stuff about turning over people and transitioning of people and his thoughts around that. Really strong people leader. Talking about the use of data and how they use data to make decisions in certain areas, the changes of working with the PE firm and how that's changed the organization. And then also what it was like being an outside hire and coming in. So some really great information and advice you're going to be getting. You're going to love this episode. We'll see you on the inside. So, hey, Rick, welcome to the Second in Command podcast.
It's great to be here, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to talking with you today, learning a little bit about you as well. Before we kind of dive in, why don't you just talk about kind of what Advent is as a company? I know you're president of Advent right now. We'll talk about how you got into the role as president and why you joined the organization and the change that the organization is going through. But just talk to us a little bit about the company itself so we understand the perspective you'll be coming from today.
Sure. So Advent is a subspecialty ear, nose, and throat practice that has, over the course of, believe it or not, 15 years. It'll be an interesting comparison because the path we're on right now is very different than sort of the first 12 to 13 years. But subspecialty ENT practice that has honed its service offering to focus on what we call the breathing triangle, which is basically your nose and throat, and really focused on helping people both understand and then fix their nasal obstruction, their sinus obstruction, so that you can breathe properly through your nose. And there's a whole science behind the positive effects of proper nose breathing that we'll touch upon a couple things today, but generally that's what we do. So it's emerged from a privately owned independent physician practice to a couple of years ago doing a transaction with a private equity firm. So we have a financial partner now. And our mission really is to bring sleeping, snoring solutions to as many patients as we can across the upper Midwest as sort of our first geographic footprint of the expansion of the business.
Was it a one location business originally and now it's evolved into, and how many locations do you have now?
Yeah, it started back by our founder, Dr. Madan Kandula, started the business. He and his wife operated a very traditional ENT practice. They started with one clinic here in the Milwaukee market, and for several years basically ran that clinic and then a couple others. And during that period of time, he really evolved what the medical protocol and the focus of the company was going to be. Rather than being a broad-based ENT practice, he saw the opportunity to really focus in on the breathing triangle, as I mentioned, and really just bring all of what is typically done both in a fragmented way and typically in surgery centers or operating rooms, bring all that into the office environment. So 98% of what we do, which are nasal and sinus procedures, are done in office. So we've greatly reduced the barriers to entry for patients, both on cost and ease of access and convenience and recovery time. So it's a fascinating model when you look at what we're able to do. And basically about 2016, 17 on, Dr. Kandula decided to really narrowcast the business and began to open additional clinics in Wisconsin. He opened a handful of those over the course of the next 3 to 4 years. And right before COVID, took the step to cross the state line into the state of Illinois. Believe it or not, during COVID and then thereafter opened 4 clinics down in Illinois.
Wow.
And so we're operating basically 9 clinics built and operated 9 clinics over the course of about 5 or 6 years. This is all before the transaction was done with the private equity firm.
And the current locations are all ones that you did startups? None of these were acquisitions?
Ones that I talked about up to this point in the history timeline were all de novos.
Yeah.
And our model very much is a de novo build model. But interestingly, when we look at what we've accomplished in the last year, particularly in 2020, we entered 2 new states. We entered Minnesota and we entered Indiana. And both of those state entries were through acquisition, through partnerships.
Okay.
So similar minded ENT physicians that were doing in-office procedures, loved our model, wanted to fully commit to what we were doing. We've partnered with each of them. In Indiana, we're in South Bend now, just down the street from the Notre Dame campus. And in Minnesota, we're up in Blaine and are going to be opening several new clinics there this year.
Okay, well, no, this is completely weird because I actually am a client, not of your business, but of this exact set of types of procedures. 2 years ago, I had to go in and get 2 procedures done. They decided to do them both at the same time because my travel schedule was insane. The doctor said they almost never do both procedures at the same time because there's so much healing process. But I had a very bad deviated septum, really struggled with breathing through my nose. And then they had to do a cut here where they kind of lifted up my tongue and moved it forward or stitched it down or did something. But he's a 18-year ENT here in Arizona, and he said that it was the narrowest breathing at the back of the throat that he'd seen in 18 years. And he said that after the surgery, not as trying to get me in.
Did you have terrible snoring?
Pretty bad at times, yeah. But it was also really struggled with breathing. I used to be a runner. I ran marathons. I've run half marathons, 10Ks. I used to ski race. And I always was a mouth breather and had struggled with breathing through my nose. I'll tell you it took about 6 months to get all the pain in the neck and stuff to completely heal. But it feels like I'm cheating now with breathing. It feels like I have 2 noses. Like I can literally through my nose get so much air. It's weird. It's a completely different sensation. And then I read the book. Is it Breath or Breathe? The book.
Breathe. Yeah.
Breathe.
Yep.
Fantastic book.
Like, it is a fantastic book.
Yeah. I remember listening to it on a hike that I was doing in, I think it was in California. And I was hiking and I started practicing just doing the nose breathing. And now I've used the strips that go over your mouth, and there's some real science behind this stuff. It's pretty cool stuff.
There really is. And I think, just when you ask what's Advent's mission and vision about, it really is to develop, we look at as developing the category, that this is such an underappreciated and focused area that more and more consumers need to understand that you don't have to live this way, right? Yeah. You don't have to continue to go through those struggles. And so I'll just sort of finish up. The last unique piece of our business model is that we are direct to consumer. Most subspecialties rely on referrals from primary care, and other subspecialists depending on the situation. One of the things Dr. Kandula did very early on was to sort of throw away the traditional model, go direct to consumer. And so we have a pretty substantial marketing budget annually to get out and to get the word out and get Advent name in front of folks that can benefit from this. And the model's proven to be really effective.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've been a part of 3 different roll-ups in my career. We rolled up the house painting industry. We did it with the collision repair industry. It's called Gerber Auto Collision in the US. The first company was called College Pro Painters. And then I did it in garbage with 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And in all of those cases, the category had existed, like ENTs and this surgery has been around forever, but there's no brand around it, right? There's no household. I had no idea where to go because there was all these independent physicians. But is that the idea then, is to build a brand?
Your experience is exactly the thing why Advent exists, because most consumers, patients that have this problem don't know where to turn. Many of the primary care physicians will just be, prescribing nasal sprays and things like that. They might send you to a pulmonologist who might then send you to a sleep lab, and it's very, very fragmented. Yeah. And so, the vision that Dr. Kandula had for our model was really to bring it all under one roof, do it in office as opposed to focusing on taking you to the surgery, and do this as minimally invasive as possible.
I also really like that there's going to be a brand around it because this is embarrassing. I was very, very happy with my surgery. I think the doctor who did the work was spectacular, great bedside manner, really easy to talk to. I can't remember his name, and it's only 2 years ago. I literally can't. I've been sitting here for 10 minutes going, what the hell is his name? I can't remember what his name was, which means I can't even enthusiastically give a referral. But if there was a brand around it, right, like a Redirect Health or an Advent or something, I could quite easily, so yeah, you're onto something big. Were you from the industry or were you from the outside of the industry?
The way I would describe myself is I've been a private physician practice operator for basically 20 years.
Okay.
So I've spent, prior to coming to Advent, I was doing very similar practice management work in the fertility space.
Okay.
Both managing and running individual fertility centers. And then in my last position prior to coming here, serving as interim CEO of a management service organization of 25 clinics across the US and Canada. It's very similar work. When you are a management service organization that is providing services to clinicians and practices, the nature of the work is very similar no matter what subspecialty you're in. And I looked at this opportunity uniquely from my background because obviously practice management is in my blood, but prior to really coming back into this space back in 2007, I spent a handful of years in consumer packaged goods and healthcare and OTC products. I had a very accelerated, fun, and interesting education on, what it is to really market direct to consumer. And so for me, coming into this environment, it was a great match because I have both backgrounds and can appreciate, in our case, most subspecialties invest about 1% of their budget in marketing. We invest 10% of ours. So it's a very different animal. And for me, it was just a great fit where I could use, both my business skills and my direct-to-consumer marketing skills.
But you weren't a physician. You've been in the medical and running. Okay.
I've been sort of an administrator my whole life, and I followed in my dad's footsteps. He ran a hospital literally for 60 years of his life, came in as controller and quickly became president and then CEO. And he ran that community hospital forever. It was a teaching and research hospital as well. I have the advantage of having a great tutor that studied the healthcare system each and every day, and it sort of just got passed on in the genes.
Well, because you really don't find a lot of very successful doctors / entrepreneurs. It's like two very, very different skill sets, right?
Yeah, and I will tell you that those that have had the success and gravitate to it typically have been subspecialty physicians that just have that flair.
Yeah.
So the fertility field was full of them. Think about it. Fertility basically came into sort of a commercialization in the 1980s once Louise Brown was born and the technology was proven to work effectively and safely. The category took off, but it's only been around for 40 years.
Sure.
The current group of physicians that are now exiting out on retirement were all those physician entrepreneurs. They all said, we want to go do this IVF thing. And the hospitals were like, we're not investing in that. Yeah. So they're like, well, you know what? I'm just going to go do it on my own. And I will say, Dr. Kandula here at Advent is that same visionary, that same entrepreneur. He also has a great knack for marketing. It was really important for him to be able to bring the business where he's brought it to at this point.
It sounds very similar to the cannabis industry, where you have a whole bunch of these businesses these were just a bunch of people that like to smoke pot that opened up businesses. They weren't necessarily good at the horticulture and the growing of actual plants. And the ones who have been super successful are the ones who are really from the science side of it, not just necessarily they like to smoke pot once in a while. All right.
Yeah, so, and at the heart of all of that is, as all great entrepreneurs have, is that vision and that drive, that mission to practice what they see in front of them.
That's what I want to ask you about. What was it about the doctor that you liked or that you resonated with that got you to join his business? Was it his vision? Was it his personality?
He's very charismatic. So yes, the culture that he built here early on and the energy and enthusiasm that this organization has and continues to have was certainly a check in the right box for me. But he's also, as I said, he proved to be a great marketer, which is very, very, very unusual. I mean, I know physicians that are great scientists and have creative development minds for new technology and advancement. Dr. Kandula is just a great marketer. It's in his DNA. He just gets it naturally and he's committed to it. So he recognized early that was going to be his major point of differentiation and how he was going to actually be able to grow the business. So the fact that was core, that he believed in it, the model was clear to me. Those are really the two from who I was going to be working with and partnering with. Those were really the two key factors for me that it was like, all right, this certainly can work.
What do you think he saw in you?
I think he appreciated the fact that I had a marketing background and I had an appreciation background. Yeah. So I think that certainly was a good fit. But I also think that he got to a point where he recognized that in order for this business to really scale and go forward, there was a new generation of leaders in the organization that needed to come together and help the organization mature to a next stage. And that's really, quite honestly, for the last year and a half, that's what we've been focused on is building the foundation department by department, but then across the organization, developing policies and procedures, best practices, and really ingraining a discipline within our management team of how we want to do business. So even though, relatively speaking, we're still a fairly small company, we like to act like we're a big, sophisticated company. And being able to bring those techniques, data analytics is a huge part of what we practice every day, but bringing those things to the forefront and using them as tools to run the business, I think he intuitively knew that it was time to do something different. It's also part of the reason why he, chose to partner with a financial partner as well, because that help and assistance, they recruit and bring in people like me that have the pertinent experience.
Yeah.
To be able to drive these things. It was just the right time for him to do that.
So had he partnered with the PE firm prior to bringing you on then? Was that part of, okay.
Yes. Yeah. So in my case, it was a traditional working with PE firm, working with the founder to begin to bring in new team members.
Interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk about that you're a smaller company and you want to try to be like, act like, or work more like a bigger company. I had a mentor years ago who was being groomed as the second in command at Starbucks, and he mentored me for almost 2 years. And one of the mantras at Starbucks, it was actually a huge saying on one of their walls at their head office that I saw one day. And it said, grow big, act small. But they were already like, 14,000 locations. So they were trying to stay entrepreneurial. But I love what you're talking about too, which is we know that these tools are out there. They've almost become commoditized or democratized, that we can actually leverage a lot of these tools now at a fraction of what they used to cost us. So it's almost irresponsible not to use them, right?
Exactly. And there's a business discipline. So one of my, big mantras over the years for me has been, make informed decisions by using data. So the data that's in front of you should be the thing that you are using as a guide to help inform decision making. It doesn't make the decision for you, but it certainly is there to help guide and provide as much factual perspective as possible. Early on in my career, I spent a few short years in the environmental business, and I was doing a presentation to the CEO of the company I worked for, and we were doing a market analysis, talking about competitive situation, capacity in the market, whatnot. And so during my presentation, I said, well, I think da-da-da-da-da. And he said, Rick, stop. Don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you know. And then I did it again in the presentation, and he stopped me.
Great.
Rick, don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you know. And it obviously stuck. And it really has been a guiding force for me over time in terms of we've got all this data. And obviously in today's world, we have literally too much data. But how you use it for decision making and back to the point of acting like a sophisticated company, that's one of those places where you can really make better decisions if you commit to it.
And it's interesting. One of the most successful companies of the last 25 years is Google. And Google famously says, I don't care what you think. What does the data say? And it's because they have so many smart people that have opinions that if they let these smart people raise their opinions, it's dangerous. So they're like, thanks for your idea, thanks for your opinion, but what's the data say?
Exactly.
So I actually had a question of how to use your data, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, in our business, we're really using it around trying to optimize. We're knee deep right now, for instance, in a labor optimization exercise. We've developed new modeling around demand and capacity and figuring out how we best flex our clinical resources, particularly because that's where the transactions happen for us. But how do we optimize that and use staff smartly and wisely and get the most out of the dollars we have? And likewise, if we have periods where demand is light, how do we flex and not just be carrying a lot of fixed cost?
It's so smart that you measure that, because as a company scales, especially when they have an injection of capital, they often get a little bit lazy on people. And I see that it's often the early stage managers in their career, their first time managing people, where they don't necessarily have the wisdom of seeing this yet or the experience, but their answer to every problem is hire more people. Right. Instead of optimization or saying no or automation or how do you get more labor efficiency. So it's smart. How many employees do you have system-wide currently?
So we're 250. The dynamic you just described is exactly the cycle we've just gone through.
I identify companies at the ones and the threes, and from 1 person to 3, from 3 to 10, from 10 to 30, from 30 to 100, from 100 to 300. And when you're in the 100 to 300, that's what happens. Mid-level managers are messing stuff up. You're building your first leadership team from a first management team to a leadership team. And then you're also busting through silos in politics and stuff that's starting to creep in as well, right?
Absolutely.
What do you think has changed with the culture from the first injection of capital, and how much have they grown in that, what is it, a 3-year period, 2.5-year period?
Yeah, so from a top line perspective, we basically doubled the business in the most recent 3-year period. And the bottom line has followed. So we've seen tremendous growth in top and bottom line. The thing that's probably changed the most is that we have a lot of change in the management team. So we've been very critical, if you will, of the skill sets that we need on the team, and where the business has outgrown the skill set, we've made the hard decision to make changes. I basically have now pretty much at the end of turning over the entire senior leadership team. So that's been an important piece. We are now doing the same thing at the next level down. One of the exercises we went through in our annual planning was a 9-box evaluation of our director levels, and had very open and honest and 360, input around each individual, where their skill sets were, where their strengths were, and whether we thought they were going to be able to scale with the business or not. And that exercise will inform us for, what we're going to do this year in terms of development. If we can develop people, we certainly want to do that first. If they prove they can turn with us, great. If it's just too much, then we'll have to make further hard decisions. But that's been a real focal point for us, because without the right mindset, and I'll come back to the other big theme, both on the senior leadership team as well as how it trickles down to the next layer of management, is we need alignment. If we don't have alignment on what we're trying to do, the philosophies we're following, why we make the decisions we make, then, as you know, people can go off and really cause disruption and really slow things down in a way that's not going to be productive for the organization. So
interesting. I dropped a link into the chat that you can look at after we get off our call, but it's a course that I launched 2 years ago that you guys might devour at that management level, the mid-level management. It's called Invest in Your Leaders. It's all the soft core skills that managers need to be better at. But I wanted to ask you about turning over the leadership team. There's an art and a science to doing that, when you have to start firing people that have been there, people that have grown with the organization. And it's almost looking for the ripple effects of, that these great people bring, that you bring them in, they're going to do great, but there's all these unintended ripple effects that happen, good and bad. People are frustrated that they have to report to this new person, or they're disappointed they don't get to report to the old one, or they're pissed off they didn't get the role. Can you talk to us or speak to some of that? How do you kind of think about those advanced chess moves, 3-4 moves in advance, and get the team ready for all of that? Or how do you react to it better?
Yeah, so for me, it really starts with the philosophy and the mindset of our functional leadership and what I'm looking for. So, in my role, I'm certainly looking for my key senior managers to be business leaders first and functional leaders second. And that's been a huge mind shift. So as I've, think about some of the changes that have been made, it really was that an individual may have been too narrowly focused in the function, and by default, in a lot of ways, was siloing.
Yeah.
And in other cases, the interests and the pursuits were more esoteric and chasing the kinds of things that weren't immediately value added or needed to focus on to actually drive, for instance, the analytics around how we're managing our human capital. So those are places where, for me, it's been, okay, I need the right kind of mindset, the right kind of leader. And then once those decisions are made, and we go into the hiring process, I've actually invited, knowing in the cases where the departure was known, invited members of the team to interview the people, interview
their future boss.
Yeah. And have some input into the process. I do that for a couple of reasons. One is kind of the more obvious reason, which is, it's good for team members to be able to participate and feel like they had a say and some influence in the decision making. But the other part of it is, when I sit down with the individuals and invite them to the process, it gives me a chance to explain where we're going. And to set the table from my lens, what I'm looking for in this next leader for that particular group.
Sure.
And so it serves a couple great purposes. And I have found that over the years to be helpful. Across the board, I also, and I'm sure you've seen this time and time again, that it always helps to stop and explain the whys and connect the dots for people, and not just tell them the what, but explain the why. And when you can explain the why, then a lot of times you get better buy-in, and quite often you get better execution, because people just have a better understanding of the bigger picture.
How many direct reports do you have currently, and what's your typical day-to-day or week-to-week look like right now?
So I have 6 direct reports right now. It was a little less when I got here. We eliminated one of the director levels, and the 2 people reporting to that person now to report to me directly. So I don't feel like I'm top heavy on direct reports, but that's sort of how it evolved. My day-to-day is really probably 60% of my time is spent on one-on-ones with my department leaders. So we have standard one-on-one meetings. This organization has followed EOS for many years. So we use Traction Tools, or Bloom Growth now, as it is the software we use to run our meetings. It's been certainly helpful for organization and structure. So that's about 60% of my time. The other 40% of my time is really spent on driving business development and expansion activities. So we still, 85%, 90% of our business is commercial payer. We spent a lot of time in 2022 developing our value proposition, getting it very tight and pointed, and are now out in the marketplace talking with the major insurers as well as self-insured companies about what we do and the benefits that we can bring. So certainly time on business development, working with our vendors as well in terms of relationships and contracting. So pretty much probably a 60 manage my people, 40 manage the business kind of split day to day, week in and week out.
Got it. You mentioned traction in EOS. I know Gino Wickman really well, and typically EOS tends to break down, or the traction tends to break down when you get to like the 100+ employee mark. And are you moving over to scaling up Vern Harnish's content at all? Are you looking at Shannon Shusko's 3 Hag Way? Are you iterating and making traction into something that is more corporate or bigger?
It's not. And I would say that, interestingly, for those of us that came to the business from bigger organizations that hadn't actually had any exposure to EOS, we're all sort of scratching our heads going, quickly we realized we've outgrown this. This is, where the organization is. It's a great tool for the company.
It's amazing from 10 to 100 people, though.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, we are in the process of doing just that, evaluating, what structure and system we need to move going forward.
Are you familiar with Vern Harnish and his book Scaling Up?
Yes.
Take a look at Scaling Up, because Scaling Up is horrible from 10 employees to 100, and it's amazing from the 100 to the 1,000. It just tends to be a little bit more robust, a little bit more. You need strong leaders who understand the methodologies, the cross-functional teams, and as you mentioned, that you're getting your leaders to be business leaders first, functional leaders second. The analogy I use with that is, if you've got let's say the Dallas Cowboys, and you've got the wide receiver from the Dallas Cowboys, what's the most important team for him? Is it the offensive team, the special teams, the defensive team? What's the most important team for the wide receiver?
So I'll say I'll go offensive, but you're going to tell me it's different.
Where do you think I'm going to tell you it is?
You're going to probably tell me it's defensive.
Now, what's the business team that he should really focus on? It's the Dallas Cowboys, right? The most important team for every business leader is the company itself, not their functional team. Because most people say, oh, it's the offensive team, but really every single player is obsessed with the Dallas Cowboys. They're like high-fiving the defense when they come off. They're telling them what they just saw. They're helping each other. Like, they're not just so focused on their own role. It's the whole team. And I think that's what we need leaders. And that's where managers become leaders, is they argue and debate stuff for the good of the core values. They argue and debate for the good of the vision. That's kind of what you intuitively already get.
There's sort of an interesting sort of up and down dynamic, maybe a 30,000 and a 3,000 foot dynamic that I see going on, and particularly in this, where this business is right now with our team members, and that is the ability to embrace and understand at a very core level what's going on in your function, and being a subject matter expert on the various aspects. You don't have to do the work, but you need to understand the work. And then being able to come up and, to your point, explain it within the context of the broader organization and the good of the organization, and how it then fits and collaborates across functions in a way that's cohesive and productive, as opposed to, being either destructive, which it can be in certain cases, or not. So there's an interesting dynamic that goes on there, and different people have different ability to go in between those two levels. And I feel like we're there right now. And just to kind of put a finer point on it, the thing I see most people struggling with is the definition of accountability, sort of old day accountability, new day accountability, and as we grow and there's more pressure on performance, the importance of actually achieving things on deadlines and dates and creating milestone plans quarterly around rocks, as it is in EOS, becomes more and more and more critical to the pulsing of the organization. And to that point, we literally just this quarter have started a weekly check-in on milestones. So we've pulled it out of EOS. We still have it in EOS, but we pulled out the review. I bring the entire team together. So we probably have too many, but we have 20 projects this month. So we just today had our first 20 and 20 meeting, and that's 20 rocks are reviewed in 20 minutes.
Nice.
On track, off track.
Wow. Love it.
And go right around the table. And if you're off track and you need help, you stay after, and we sit and we work on it. And we're doing this weekly, so that, there's no escaping. There are Gantt charts that have been established with due dates on all this. And it's just another, back to this point of discipline, it's another level of focus and commitment that at the end of the day, and I keep telling everybody, I know this is a royal PIA and it seems like micromanagement, but I promise you that if we get disciplined in this, that we will actually hit our milestones on the, and the dates we say we're going to hit them.
As Jim Collins used to say, disciplined people, disciplined thought, disciplined action, right?
Absolutely.
I used to coach a company over in Switzerland, and I talked to them one day and I was like, it's incredible how you guys consistently deliver everything on time. And the CEO said, well, he started laughing, goes, we're Swiss. It's like, everything has to run on time. It's just so weird to them to not even think that way, right? I just laughed. What was your first 90 days like at Advent? What do you remember back that, year and a half back? What was your first 90 days coming in? How did you operate?
Yeah, it's like my first 90 days everywhere that's new, and probably for most people, and that is just trying to figure out how the organization, runs, trying to figure out what makes it tick, figure out what the culture is about, how they've gotten to where they've gotten. And, so for instance, in my case here with EOS, that was a very foreign system to me. I actually hadn't even heard of it until I got here. And so I needed to be respectful of the system that was in place and listen and learn and observe as to what it was doing for the organization. And then, as you pointed out, what it was not doing for the organization, and just begin to digest and start to architect in my mind kind of what the future of how we're going to operate was going to look like. And I've had a couple mentors that taught me early on, and I've carried this with me too. And that is, in your first, 30 days, 60 days, just go and observe. And just go sit with the people that do the work and watch what they do and ask questions about what's going on. And you will learn so much about an organization just by listening and asking, as opposed to the old, don't come charging in and trying to make changes day one to impress people or feel like you're somehow adding value from the moment you step in the door. Totally.
Yeah, it's so dangerous if you do. You just don't have enough. It's kind of like test the hypotheses. All right, I want you to go back to the 22-year-old, and you're just kind of getting ready to graduate university, and Rick Dietz needs some advice. What advice would you give yourself back then that you know to be true today, but you wish you'd known back when you were 21 or 22?
There's one really practical piece. If you're willing and able to go into a sales job just for a short period of time and learn traditional selling, those skills will stay with you forever. And I know that, unfortunately, sales gets a bad rap a lot, as a profession. But the skills that we all learn from getting some traditional selling training, you use them every day. And you're always selling to somebody every moment of the day. So if you're willing to kind of put a little bit of time into that and do it, I think it's a great, simple, sort of tactical professional development exercise. I think the second piece is probably what I violated all the time, and is to learn some patience. I and those that are hardwired to like me, and I met a few of me along the way, we wanted to change the world overnight, and we were at our boss's doors banging on the door and, frustration. Why is this place this way? And, and not just having enough experience with organizational, dynamics and how places run. And just from that, learning to be able to step back, again, observe, try to understand every organization's different. Decision-making is different. How the process works is different. How bosses like to interact with you, how they're asking you to carry yourself in the organization is different. So having some patience when you go into these early jobs and being able to observe, and from a cultural and behavioral perspective first, and then you can kind of get into your subject matter elements next. I wish along the way I'd been had a little bit of that whispering in my ear, because I know there were plenty of moments where it was like, shut up and sit down.
I love that. Rick Dietz, the president of Advent, thank you so much for sharing with us today on the Second in Command podcast. Really appreciate your time.
Great to be here, Cameron. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I didn't want to become a leader. I didn't want the title of manager because I wanted to be able to give orders or because I wanted to have the title of boss. It's because I genuinely wanted to make a difference. I understood what it's like to be a frontline employee and kind of feel like you're on an island. And I wanted to change that. I wanted to bring my old sauce to the table and say, this is how a team should